and pension bondholders in Ghana are insisting that they want to be exempted from the government's domestic debt exchange program, despite an extension of the deadline by the government to the 31st of January this year. Meanwhile, the government maintains that having a consensus is key to a successful economic recovery, and I have Richmond Frimpong, he's a financial advisory consultant. He joins me now for this discussion. Thank you so much for your time today, Frimpong. Richmond, quite a lot happening when you look at the bond. But before we get into the discussions per se, I'd like to get your thoughts on what those 8 groups are saying. If you listen to the stories I read earlier about a possible exemption for debt extension by some of the creditors here.
Right, Kenneth. So I think that the creditor investor community are basically worried about the impairments their investment have suffered already, even before the debt exchange program, due to the difficult macroeconomic challenges Ghana is facing. And so I think looking at the term sheet, they feel that they are probably going to be losing too much. And so I think their point is for government to take a second look at the terms, so that they can probably take a second consideration to the exchange. On government side also, government is racing for time because of the IMF bailout program. They've just secured a staff level agreement, which is not enough. They need to go to the management and then the board approval. And that is quite tight in a race. Just yesterday, if you look at the international reserves, it's just about 1.5 months of import cover. And we are really grinding to a halt. And so both government and the bondholders are all in a very uncomfortable corner, so to speak. And I think it's time to leverage on the extension to recalibrate the conversations and then come into an agreement that will benefit everyone.
Yeah, because it's quite a lot happening around the same time. Because today as well, we could see the government miss out on the $41 million interest payments due on its Eurobond. And what sort of signaling is it sending out to investors here?
I think by now, all investors have a certain idea about the intention to do some debt suspensions. Now, the challenge is that it's the domestic market that is showing some pushback because of the exchange program. On the external side, most of these creditor investor community guys are institutional in nature. And so even if the debt is the debt payment or the interest payment is suspended, they are somewhat not really disadvantaged until there is a default activated. And so they will just wait until the government comes clear in terms of its default position. But on the domestic side, it affects individuals, it affects both direct and indirect holders, even mutual fund investor contributors, which is quite a huge chunk of the middle class. And so that is where the pain points are. And I'm believing that I think the government will have to step up a bit in terms of its conversation to address this in real time.
Yeah, because now we're seeing this program being extended for the 3rd time now, and the concerns from bondholders on one hand is there. Pension bondholders have already stated their position. We're also seeing in the individual investor bondholders, they are saying that they want to be engaged if the conversations are going to go forward. But how would you like to see this being addressed?
I think that 2 things. The government's position to restructure its debt to a certain sustainable limit where it can activate and speed up the conversation on the IMF bailout is critical. And so whatever the government is trying to do, there is some reason in there. They are racing for time, and there's no time really to belabor the points. So that is the position. And so for government, it's aspiring to see a very speedy kind of engagement that will bring it to a place where it can say, I have a position on my domestic debt stance. On the other side, if you look at the individual bondholders, the institutional, the banks, and even the pension industry, everyone also has a significant point. Why? Because the entire financial system, the ecosystem, it is at stake. And they want to also make sure that it doesn't collapse in the effort to accept the term sheet as it is. So 2 things. The government should go back and reconstruct the conversations with all stakeholders once again, and not to have a permanent position, so to speak, so that there can be some progress in terms of sign-off. On the side of the investor community also, I think they by now should know that it is not possible to make progress without taking some form of sacrifice and some form of haircut. And so it is just about the conversation as to what extent. And when this is all agreed to by both parties, then we make progress on this leg. The other leg is that the government should really take serious and maybe increase its pace, the conversation on the G20 common framework policy, where they are able to now engage their bilateral agents and partners, like say China, and begin to talk to them about how the debt forgiveness conversation can be activated, so that if it so happens that this term sheet doesn't stand, at least the debt forgiveness angle can still bring some success in terms of the sustainability they are trying to achieve for debt to GDP, so that progress ultimately can be made on securing the $3 billion bailout from the IMF.
Talking about the stakeholders here and how they're also being impacted now, I'd like to bring in the banks. Reading the statement from the finance ministry, the ministry says that they are already having discussions with banks on issues like the forbearance measures and also the accounting treatment of all of this. But what sort of outcomes can we expect from these conversations?
So I think that this is a very good case for the banks, especially to learn from the situation of having to not do a lot of lending to the private sector or the private economy, and to be doing so much, almost everything, giving the government almost everything through bonds and through treasury bills and things. This is how now every economy is exposed. Now, they are concerned about the losses they are going to be taking. They are concerned about how their balance sheet is going to be hit. They are concerned about the minimum capital requirements and a number of things that can hurt them. And so I think they just want the term to be varied, literally. And if the term can be varied a bit, I think they have a clear position. Then there can be some headway. In the form it is, it will be extremely difficult for the banks to take it. Why? Because it is going to affect employment. It's going to even affect their ability to have the right minimum capital that qualifies them to be banks. Many of them can even fall under the radar, and that can be detrimental even to the economy. So I'm not sure even the government is excited about that challenge, just so that everybody is able to meet halfway to a certain extent. And I think that is a position of the banks. And I believe that the government understands clearly. Why? Because they will be slapping corporate tax on them if they do well. If they don't, government loses out on revenue that they would have paid to them.
Yeah, but looking at this holistically, I'd like you to speak on Ghana's economic recovery process and more or less what's that journey looking like right now?
Genuinely, Ghana's macroeconomic stability at the moment is very, very, very challenged. And even as at yesterday, if you look at the numbers, the international reserves has fallen from just about 4 months of import cover to a little above 1.5 months. And that is quite scary. You know, the rule of thumb suggests that it should be minimum of 3 months. And so for the government at this time where interest payments have been suspended, and still there is some pressure on international reserves, that is quite risky. That is the more reason why Ghana cannot delay any further, because for just 6 weeks, it is too risky to delay further. And the more we delay, the more very difficult it gets for the economy. So it is quite challenging. And so what is required now is speed in execution, so that the only way out, which is the IMF bailout, can come to correct the balance of payment exposures we have and to bring the economy's macro stability back on course.
All right.